Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you remember last week in this segment of Nahjul Balagha, or this Khutba Mutaqeen, which we've been discussing, we talked about the segment where Imam is mentioning the attribute of Muttaqeen, that Atsaduhum Nahifa, that they're thin, as far as their bodies are concerned, they're thin. And we went on to the details as to it's not a physical thing that Imam is mentioning. Rather, Imam is referring to words that these are the people who don't look forward to filling up their bellies. And we proved that through some of the examples that Imam himself mentions. And we went into details of that. So we see that it is possibility, so we can give a possibility that here Imam ﷺ could be referring towards Asaduhum Nahifa, as those who only worry about filling up their bellies, otherwise eating pure food is not considered a sin. And it gives energy for ibadat and other activities as well. This can be derived from various verses from Quran. If that was the case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not be giving us the permission to go ahead and use that. We see in Surah Mu'minun, verse number 51, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhar rusul, kulu min at-tayyibati wa'amalu salihan. He says, O apostles, and it's a plural because it's talking about more than one Rasul. O apostles, eat of good things and act righteously. We see that there's a fine combination between the two things which are being mentioned over here. One is that Rasul is being ordered to eat good things, and that has some sort of relationship with acting righteously. Otherwise, the Kalam of Hakim would not have put both of these things back to back in the same sentence. It says, Ya ayyuhar Rasul, kulu min at-tayyibati wa'amalu salihan. And then we see in this verse, consumption of pure food is considered means for acting righteously and not means for indulgence and filling up the bellies. So some can use pure food for this reason, while others might be utilizing for whatever reason that they might have. But this is the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed the pure food for. And this is why we see from Rasulullah as well. And he says, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna allaha tayyibun, la yaqbilu illa tayyiban. That all the people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is definitely pure. He's tayyib and he does not accept anything but tayyib. Therefore, if you want just a physical tayyib, you should also have internal tayyib as well, whatever it is that you put into your bellies. We also see another place in regards to those people who forbade things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made pure and the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made okay for them to use. For example, in Surah Araf, verse number 32, he says, قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي أَخْرَجَ لِعِبَادِهِ وَالطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ. It says, say, who has forbidden the adornment of Allah, which He has brought forth for His servants, and the good things of His provision. In this interrogative sentence, if you look at it, negative question which is being asked, obviously when you ask, this is not a question which is being asked, rather it is a khabar which is being given to them. In this verse, we see the question which is being raised as to who makes the adornment of Allah, the sustenance that He has made halal forbidden. Who among you is doing that? In other words, Allah is giving an admonition to those people who go ahead and make the halal haram and make the haram into halal. This is a direct order from Quran saying, no, don't consider those things which Allah has made pure to be haram. And that's why I don't know if I had a time or discussed it over here in the few weeks before, that you need a proof to go ahead and say something which is haram. You do not require a proof to say something which is halal. And that's why you see, I think it was in a majlis that I was talking about, that we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the things which are haram because they're less in numbers. He mentions the najasat because they're countable on the fingers. He mentions things which are forbidden on the hands, as opposed to, He did not go ahead and mention the things which are halal for us, because there are so many things which are halal, it would have been a long list. But Quran mentions to us the animals which are haram for us to consume, the things which are haram for us to consume, the najasat to an extent it mentions, and the books of fiqh also mention and list them because they're shorter in number. And therefore you require a question in front of, if someone says this is haram, then you ask a question, what is the dalil of making such a thing haram? When someone says this is halal, halal, you don't ask a reason as to what makes this thing to be halal. What is it that's not in it which makes it haram? This will not be a logical question. So therefore, there are more things which are halal than there are haram. So here is a question being asked, a direct ayat from Quran, Surah Araf, verse number 32, which says, قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي أَخْرَجَ لِعِبَادِهِ وَالطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ. Who has forbidden the adornment of Allah which He has brought forth for His servants and the good things of His provision? Who among you is doing that? So we see, although it is apparent that it is being mentioned as halal means, other places also talk about it. For example, in Surah Ma'idah, verse 87 also says the same thing. It says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la tuharrimu tayyibati ma ahallallahu lakum, wa la ta'tadu, inna Allah la yuhibbul mu'tadeen. He said, oh, you have faith, do not prohibit the good things that Allah has made lawful to you, and do not transgress. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like the transgressors. So, making things which are tayyib forbidden. We'll go into the details as to what is this tayyib. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering us to use the tayyibat, things which are pure, which are tayyibat. And at the same time, admonishing the people who forbid using the tayyibat. And from here, we can easily deduce that if these things which are considered to be tayyib were bad, why would wise and the knowledgeable Creator would create them? If these things were not allowed, why would He create them? Secondly, now that He has created them, why would He forbid them once He has created these things? So therefore, is there any conflict in the system of creation and the religious teachings? No, there's no conflict. The nizam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, the nizam al-takwini and the nizam al-tashri'i that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, both are in synchronization. There's no ikhtilaf and there's no contradiction between the two. Going back to the previous verse from Surah Araf, which says, the zinatullahi allati harrama, qul man harrama zinatullahi allati, say who has forbidden. Allah commands Prophet to tell people that these pure and halal things which Allah has created are exclusively for the believers. I want your attention on this point, that they're exclusively for the believers. Because the end of the ayah, which when I will recite, it will become clear. He said these things which are pure that Allah has created, the halal things, are exclusively for the believers, and the utilization by the non-believers is only incidental. What does that mean? Initially and originally, everything is created for the believers because, and looking at an example of a gardener, person who runs a garden, who takes care of a gardener waters his flowers, and his purpose is watering them only exclusively to foster these flowers. But there will be weed on the side which will benefit from the water which is reaching them. But the intention of the gardener is not for those weeds. Rather, the intention for the gardener is only meant for the flower that he wants to grow and he wants to nourish and he wants them to foster. The same thing, the weed, even though weed undeservingly is also benefiting from the water, but it is not meant for that. But these favors in Qiyamah are exclusively for the believers, since there's no mixing between the flowers and the weed and the Day of Judgment, and there's no mixing of the believers and the unbelievers on the Day of Judgment. It says toward the end of the ayah, قُلْ هِيَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا خَالِصَةً يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Said these are for the faithful in this life, in the life of this world, and exclusively for them on the day of resurrection. Salawat bi Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Adornment and beautification in Islam. Obviously, this is also just towards the end of this segment of Amir al-Mu'mineen, which is mentioning this Khutba of Mutaqeen. When it comes to using different types of means or different means of beautification, Islam chooses the path of moderation. It does not completely negate it, nor it does completely give you or on the other extreme to go ahead and be extravagant in this regard. There's a path of moderation which is being used over here, as opposed to some people who think even the moderate zinat is something which is against the piety and parhezgari and being against being ascetic and zuhud and whatnot. No, that is not the path which Islam is choosing. Islam is choosing the path of moderation. Of course, it's against those who extravagantly fall prey to adornment and get duped into different types of beautifications. The next part of the khutbah of Nahjul Balagha that I want to focus on the next several minutes is that Imam mentions hajatuhum khafifa, The muttaqeen are the ones that their needs are scanty. Their needs are little. Their needs are minimum. What does that mean, what Imam is saying over here? Let's go into the details of it, and inshallah we will conclude with that. In other words, Imam is saying muttaqeen are not lavish spenders, nor are they squanderers of the wealth. If they require a dress or a place to live, they keep modesty in perspective. They do not spoil their souls in order to cope in tougher times. So you go ahead and you spoil your soul right now because you have it. Just because you have it right now, you go ahead and spoil yourself for the time when you will be in need. You will be suffering for that time. So mu'min waqi'i and muttaqeen in reality is the one who keeps both of these perspectives in his mind, on her mind. On the contrary, if a person has no control over his or her spending, will run into problems at times of difficulties. One of the reasons for the advancement of Islam in the early days was its ability to stand firmly against the sanctions from the enemies. Remember Shayba Abi Talib? They were there for 3 years. The kuffar had proposed different sanctions. They had basically secluded them, and they weren't doing any type of business or trade with this community. And they were living in this place, Shayba Abi Talib, just to survive. In that needy time, Islam still went and progressed. Still the advancement was going on. The reason was that they were able to stand firmly against the sanctions from their enemies, and that was possible due to their scanty and under control needs. And if that wasn't the case, they would not have survived in those difficult times. Today, I'm no economist, but by looking at the economy today, the way it is headed, and even the top economists are bamboozled by the way the economy is acting today, reeling economy, and is due to the overspending of the individuals. The concept over here that go ahead and buy as much as you can. You don't have to worry about paying it in full because you got these imaginary money sitting there in the form of credit cards that you go ahead and swipe and you buy it. And then you can make the minimum payments, and obviously you don't have to pay the whole thing all at once. When you can't buy something and you're not able to afford that thing and pay it all in once, then you should not be buying that thing to begin with. This is just so that you start using this, or you become part of this capitalist society, so that debt comes upon you and a time comes that you're unable to even buy the necessities of the life, and you're completely dependent on others. This is where we see muttaqeen and their attribute is being mentioned over here. One thing I want to make sure that we clear it out as well, although it's something which is very obvious and most of you already know, that since credit card and all that came into discussion, some people think that making the minimum payment and paying interest on the credit cards is something which is okay. No, that is actually haram. Because paying any type of interest is haram, is riba, is considered to be haram. Some people just think, just like the society is telling us, use the credit cards and make the minimum payments and, keep on paying the interest, which is, accumulating over the years. No, it is something which is haram. If you use the credit card, the only way the credit card use is approved to buy anything is if you make the full payment at the end of the payment, the statement, whatever you have at the end of the month. When you're able to make that, then is the only case when this credit card use is allowed. Yes, it is good to keep that with you instead of keeping cash. Obviously, a lot of places now take credit cards, but keep this in mind as well, that you cannot be paying interest on that. That is something which is forbidden, and that is something which is haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it, those who consume riba, those who consume this haram, how exactly, directly they're dealt with in different verses of Quran, which I don't have time to go into the details today. Islam doesn't permit dealing with interest, and when you make, minimum payments, obviously you're dealing in interest, and that is something which we need to be aware of. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam said, he said, لِكُلِّ إِمْرَئٍ في ماله شريكان الوارث والحوادث. He said, for every person, and you need to keep this concept in mind, for every person in their wealth are two partners. Right now, this wealth that you have, there are two partners. The higher, the one who will be inheriting it, and the unexpected events, the hawadith, that will take place in the future. You got to remember, these two are sharik and partners in the wealth that you possess right now. So spend it keeping those two things in your mind. Clever is the one who keeps both in the perspective and doesn't take lead nor lags behind in either one of the cases. But here we want to also mention where Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying that the people, the muttaqeen, their needs are scanty. Who do we see and what comes into our mind? Faqir and the poverty and the poor of the community come into our mind. We see that even Rasulullah went to the extent when he says, Al-faqru fakhri, wa bihi aftakhiru ala sa'ir al-anbiya wal-mursaleen. He said, poverty is my pride, and by which I take pride over all the prophets and the messengers. I'll explain what it means when Rasulullah is saying poverty is something which I take pride in. We see that it doesn't mean being downtrodden, rather it is referring towards having less demands, not having too much demands, not having too much expectation. It is also possible that Prophet is referring towards the innate poverty that we have, in essence the poverty that we have in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya ayyuhan nas antumul fuqara ilallahi wallahu wal ghaniyul hamid. That all people, Allah subhanahu, you are faqir, you are poor, and the absolute ghana that ghani is self-sufficient is only the zat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here it is okay to be in need from the Creator, but it is discouraged to be in need from the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat bheji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allama Iqbal usually don't recite ash'ar in my speeches, especially in the Jumah khutbah, but there was a share from Allama Iqbal that I brought especially for this. It says, Ik faqr hai shabbiri. Ik faqr hai shabbiri is faqr mein hai miri. Ik faqr hai shabbiri is faqr mein hai miri. Miras musalmani sarmaya shabbiri. Now those who understood, go ahead and figure it out. That how is Allama Iqbal mentioning in regards to the sarmaya and the capital that Imam Hussein, and whom he is referring to as Shabbir, is leaving behind over here. Salawat bheji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But it is also worth mentioning over here, lest anyone gets the wrong idea that Islam promotes poverty. No, that's not the case. When Rasulullah is saying, Al-faqru fakhri, that I take pride in poverty, he's not promoting that everybody should become poor. No, that's not what is being related over here. Rather, if this was the case, we wouldn't have such ahadith which condemn poverty. Because we have the ahadith which go ahead and absolutely condemn poverty. The same Rasul is saying, Qad al-faqru an yakuna kufran, that poverty can lead towards kufr and disbelief. So stay away from it. Rasulullah said, Al-faqru mautul akbar. This poverty is the biggest of the death. Why? Because the poor dies several times in his life. Because he's dying several times, it's the biggest of the death. So this is not the case where Rasulullah is promoting to be poor and impoverished. No, this is the case where your needs and your demands are less, and that is that you're not becoming dependent on other individuals and you're only depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which means a poor person over here that Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Ya bunayya, man ibtuliya bil faqri ubtuliya bi arba'a khisalin. He says, one who sees poverty establishes or prone to see four characteristics or prone to develop four characteristics. He said, بِالزُّعْفِ فِي يَقِينِهِ. This poverty brings weakness in his yaqeen. وَالنُّقْصَانُ فِي أَقْلِهِ. Brings loss in his intellectual, in its intellect. وَالرِّقَّةِ فِي دِينِهِ. Laziness in his religion. وَقِلَّةِ الْحَيَاةِ فِي وَجْهِهِ. And the lack of modesty on his face. What means faqr leads to immorality. Therefore, Imam says, I seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from this poverty that exists. Salawat bheji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And conclude with this, that obviously when Amir al-Mu'mineen in this particular segment of Nahjul Balagha, what he's mentioning, it is actually in regards to that you and I, the Mutaqeen, if we are real Mutaqeen, their needs are scanty, their needs are minimum. They're not lavish as far as the spending is concerned. They're not squanderers of the wealth as far as the wealth is concerned. Why? Just one hadith Qudsi in this regard. The wealth that you and I have really is a favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah says, Yabna Adam, al-malu mali. He said, oh children of Adam, the wealth that you possess is my wealth, because I have given, I am the purpose that you have this wealth. He said, wal fuqara'u ayali, and the poor on the land are my, ayal in Arabic means family members, but here Allah is saying the ones that I take care of, they're depending on me. He said, وَمَنْ بَخَلَ مِنْ مَالِي عَلَىٰ ayali, adkhuluhun nar wala ubali. He said, the people who show stinginess as far as taking care of my ayal, I entered these people into the hellfire, and I don't really care about these people. He said, mal that you possess is from me. And these poor people are my ayal. Make sure you take care of them. Make sure you utilize your needs in a way that you're able to take care of the community that is also in your surrounding. Let us ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq to be able to follow these teachings from Quran as well as the teachings from Masumeen alayhi salatu wassalam. As far as our needs are concerned, as far as our spendings are concerned, they are all in the realm of taqwa. They're all preceded by piety and piousness. Inna ahsan al-hadith wa ablagh al-mu'idha kitabullahi a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.